In today's powerful story, we will learn about Sarah, a woman who was humiliated and abandoned by the man who once swore to love her. Sarah, you are the woman of my life. I promise to love and respect you until the end of my days. That's how Mark began his vows on their wedding day. Sarah smiled, holding back tears of happiness. At 25 years old, she believed she was about to live a fairy tale. In the early years, everything seemed perfect. Sarah was dedicated and caring. She took care of the house, prepared Mark's favorite dinner every Thursday, and still managed her job. The two laughed together, watched movies late into the night, and dreamed of traveling the world. But over time, things changed. Sarah began to gain weight, not significantly at first, but enough for her to notice her clothes fitting tighter. Between work stress, taking care of the house, and daily pressures, she started eating more than she should. Mark noticed. At first, his comments were subtle. "Babe, have you thought about going back to the gym? Maybe we should cut out desserts at night, huh?" Sarah laughed and agreed. She knew she needed to take better care of herself, but the routine was consuming her. For her, the most important thing was making Mark happy. Time passed, and the subtle comments turned into uncomfortable jokes. At a barbecue with friends, when Sarah reached for an extra slice of cake, Mark muttered loudly, "Really? You're going to eat more, Sarah? Aren't you satisfied?" Some friends chuckled softly while others pretended not to hear. Sarah was embarrassed but forced to laugh. She never imagined it would be the beginning of something worse. Romantic dinners were replaced with silence. Mark started coming home late, often without explanations. When they were together, he spent more time on his phone than talking to her. Gradually, Sarah began to feel invisible. She tried to talk to him. "Mark, you don't seem like yourself anymore. What's happening between us?" Without even looking at her, he replied coldly, "Maybe you should look in the mirror and figure it out." That night, Sarah cried in the bathroom while Mark slept on the couch. She still didn't understand how the man who swore to love her could treat her this way. Sarah started avoiding going out with friends because she feared being compared to others. She stopped dressing up. She stopped smiling. She thought to herself, "If my own husband doesn't see me anymore, why would the world?" Then came the day that changed everything. By chance, Sarah discovered messages on Mark's phone. Photos, sweet words, plans for trips. With another woman. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. When she confronted him, he was blunt. "Yes, I'm with someone else." "At least she takes care of herself, Sarah. Unlike you." Sarah was speechless. She looked at Mark, the man she had shared years of her life with, and saw someone completely different. He grabbed his things and walked out the door without even looking back. Now, what do you think Sarah did after being abandoned? Did she give up, or did she find a way to turn her life around? Stay with me, because this story is just beginning, and you won't believe what happens next. If you want access to an exclusive selection of real stories that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect, subscribe to the channel right now. Sarah had always been the kind of person everyone loved having around. Sweet, kind, and with a smile that lit up any room. She believed in true love. At 25, life seemed to have given her the most special gift, Mark. They met by chance at a busy coffee shop in downtown Austin, Texas. Sarah worked as an administrative assistant at a small office nearby and always stopped by the same coffee shop during her lunch break. That day, while waiting for her order, someone grabbed her cup. "Excuse me, that's my coffee," Sarah said, trying to be polite. The tall man with a captivating smile and confident demeanor looked at the cup and laughed. "Really? So this cup with Sarah written on it is mine?" They laughed together, and the mix-up led to a light and fun conversation. Mark introduced himself, and before leaving, he asked for her number. 3 days later, he called her out for a date. A simple dinner, a conversation that seemed endless, and an immediate connection. "I've never met anyone as interesting as you, Sarah." Those words stayed with her that night. They started dating shortly after. Mark was attentive, caring, and knew how to make her feel special. He showed up with flowers for no reason, sent messages saying how much he missed her, and always said, "Sarah, I'm so lucky to have found you." Back then, Sarah felt like she was living the beginning of a fairy tale. They took weekend trips to nearby towns, dined at charming spots, and dreamed of their future together. They talked about having kids, building a bigger house, and maybe traveling through Europe someday. A year after their first meeting, Mark took her back to the same coffee shop where they had met. He was nervous, something Sarah found adorable, until he knelt down and pulled out a small box. "Sarah, you're the woman I've always dreamed of. Will you marry me?" The people around clapped as Sarah, tears in her eyes, said yes without hesitation. She couldn't believe that this amazing man, who seemed so perfect, wanted to build a life with her. The wedding took place in a small hall in town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was everything they wanted. The decor was simple, with white flowers and blue accents, Sarah's favorite color. She wore a delicate dress, her eyes shining like never before. During his vows, Mark held her hands and said, "Sarah, you're the woman of my life. I promise to love and respect you until the end of my days." The words echoed in Sarah's mind. In that moment, she believed them. They began their married life in a small but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood in Austin. Sarah cared for every detail with love. She enjoyed cooking Mark's favorite dinners on Thursdays, planning surprises and seeing him smile. In the early years, everything was wonderful. The love between them seemed unshakable. On Sundays, they watched movies on the couch, eating popcorn and laughing at silly scenes. Sometimes she would look at Mark and think, "How did I get so lucky to find someone like him?" They had plans. She wanted to start college, while he dreamed of opening his own business. Whenever Sarah talked about the future, Mark would listen intently, hold her hand and say, "With you by my side, I know we'll achieve everything we dream of." Sarah believed it with all her heart. To her, love meant partnership, friendship, and trust. But sometimes life has a strange way of surprising us. Small changes that go unnoticed at first can grow into something bigger. And here's the question: what happens when the person you trust most starts to change? Did Sarah notice the signs? Was their love as strong as it seemed? Gradually, life began to take its toll. Her job at the office became more stressful, tight deadlines, demanding bosses, and little time to rest. When she got home exhausted, all Sarah wanted was to eat something quick and relax on the couch. Over months, the carefully prepared dinners turned into takeout orders. Without realizing it, this started to show on her body. Her clothes became tighter, and the numbers on the scale increased. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. "It's just a phase," she thought. But Mark's comments started to surface. "Babe, don't you want to go back to the gym? You used to love it." Sarah smiled, trying not to feel hurt. She promised she would start next week, but next week never came. The routine consumed her, taking care of the house, working all day, and still trying to please Mark. She prioritized everything except herself. Meanwhile, Mark began to change. He, who once complimented every dish she cooked, now only said, "Pizza again? We need to stop eating this junk." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but inside she felt something shift. Mark came home later and later. When he walked in, he didn't even ask about her day. He'd sit on the couch, grab his phone, and stay there, silent. "How was your day, love?" Sarah would ask, trying to make conversation. "Tiring. I don't want to talk about it right now." That type of response became the norm. On Friday nights, Mark made excuses to go out with friends, saying they were work meetings or quick hangouts. Sarah believed him. She trusted him. But the silence between them grew. The atmosphere in the house changed. The laughter was replaced by the sound of the television. The affection and words of love that once came so naturally became rare. Sarah started to feel Mark pulling away, but didn't know how to address it. One night she tried to bring it up. "Mark, don't you think we've been different? We barely talk anymore." Without taking his eyes off his phone, he replied, "You're overreacting, Sarah. Stop creating problems where there aren't any." She swallowed her words and decided not to push further. Mark's comments about her weight also became more direct. Once, while getting ready for a dinner at a friend's house, Sarah wore a dress she loved. Mark looked her up and down and said, "That dress is a bit tight, isn't it? Don't you have a bigger one?" Sarah hid her discomfort and changed. At dinner, she sat in silence, picking at her food without appetite. The small remarks turned into uncomfortable jokes, especially in public. One afternoon at a friend's barbecue, Sarah reached for a piece of cake. Mark, in front of everyone, murmured loudly enough for her to hear, "You're getting another one?" Haven't you had enough? Some laughed quietly, others pretended not to hear. Sarah put the plate back on the table and sat alone in a corner, trying to hide her urge to cry. What happened to us? She thought every night. Sarah stopped dressing up. She used to enjoy putting on makeup, doing her hair, and wearing clothes she liked. Now she opted for oversized t-shirts and sweatpants. Looking in the mirror was hard because all she could think of were Mark's comments. She distanced herself from her friends. When someone invited her out, the answer was always the same. I'm tired today, maybe next time. Sarah began to feel invisible in her own home. The Mark she had met, the one who made her feel special, seemed to have disappeared. And maybe you felt something similar, as if all of a sudden you were no longer seen by someone important, as if nothing you did was ever good enough. Sarah didn't want to believe their love was ending. She thought, this is just a rough patch. It'll pass. Mark still loves me, doesn't he? But the truth was, things were about to get worse, and Sarah had no idea what was coming. What would you do if you were in her place? Should Sarah have seen the signs? Don't go anywhere because this story has much more to reveal, and the next chapter will leave you speechless. It was a Friday night, and Sarah had spent the whole day planning a dinner. She no longer wanted to meet up with friends, but she decided to make an exception that night. Mark had invited some friends over for dinner, and as always, she wanted everything to be perfect. She prepared the meal with care, set the table with her best dishes, and even dressed up a little more than usual. She wore a blue dress that, though a bit tight, was her favorite. "You look lovely tonight, Sarah," a friend commented, trying to start a conversation while Sarah finished the final touches in the kitchen. She smiled, thanking the compliment, but felt a bit uncomfortable. She didn't know why, but something about that night felt different. Mark, on the other hand, was in high spirits. He laughed loudly with his friends, drank more than usual, and made sure to be the center of attention. While everyone was seated in the living room, Sarah brought the dinner and began serving each guest. "Wow, Sarah, this smells amazing!" One of Mark's friends complimented the food. "She's always been good at this," Mark replied in a tone that seemed to have an edge to it. Sarah noticed his tone but brushed it off. Maybe it was just her imagination. The night went on with jokes, work discussions, and old memories. Everyone seemed to be having a good time, but little by little, Mark started crossing the line with his humor. He made comments that at first seemed harmless but soon started to bother Sarah. "Honey, do you remember when we used to run in the park? Too bad it's been a while, huh?" he said, laughing and looking at one of his friends. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "We need to start doing that again," she replied, trying to hide her embarrassment. Mark looked at her and, in an even more provocative tone, added, "If you can still run, right, Sarah?" Some friends chuckled quietly. Sarah felt her face burn but kept her composure. She knew Mark had been drinking, so maybe it was just a silly moment. But the worst was yet to come. After dinner, as everyone was sitting at the table eating dessert, one of Mark's friends commented, "Mark, you're lucky to have someone who cooks so well." The room went silent, everyone waiting for Mark's response. That's when he decided to show his true colors. "Oh, she cooks too well, that's why she's this size. She's too fat to be my wife. Who would want that?" The sound of a few muffled laughs was like a punch to Sarah's gut. The silence that followed was even worse. Everyone looked down, trying to avoid the awkwardness. A friend tried to change the subject, but the words had already been said. There was no taking them back. Sarah froze. She looked at Mark, hoping he would regret it, that he would say he was joking, but he didn't even look at her. He just laughed again and took another sip of his beer, as if it meant nothing. With her face red with shame, Sarah slowly got up from the table. "Excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom," she said softly, trying to hold back her tears. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Her blue dress now felt like a mistake. She felt small, as if the world had shrunk around her. Back in the living room, Sarah did her best to act as if nothing had happened. She cleared the plates, half listened to conversations, and forced a smile when needed. But inside, she was shattered. When the guests left, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He left his glass in the sink, grabbed his phone, and went to the couch. Sarah, still silent, asked quietly, "Why did you say that?" Mark didn't even look up from his phone. "Say what? It was a joke. You take everything too seriously, Sarah." That night, Sarah lay on her side of the bed, unable to sleep. She thought about every word, every look from the guests, and every muffled laugh. How could the man she loved humiliate her like that? Sarah believed their marriage could still be saved, but something changed that night. She started to wonder if the problem was really with her or if Mark was becoming someone she didn't recognize anymore. But what Sarah didn't know was that this humiliation was just the beginning. If this story is already moving you and making you reflect, take a moment to like the video. It's a simple gesture, but it helps spread messages like this with an inspiring ending. Now let's continue, because the best is yet to come. Sarah had felt for some time that something was wrong. The Mark who came home late from work and barely spoke to her seemed like a stranger. His cruel jokes and coldness had become part of their daily life, but she still wanted to believe their marriage could be saved. One night while preparing dinner, Sarah noticed Mark's phone vibrating incessantly on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, and for the first time a voice inside her whispered, "Look, you know something is going on." She hesitated. Snooping through his phone felt wrong, but the sense of mistrust was stronger. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. The screen was unlocked. There were messages from a recent conversation. The contact was saved as Amanda, work, but all it took was opening the conversation for her world to fall apart. Love messages, photos, intimate and detailed conversations, plans for trips, including a weekend at a luxury hotel. "I'm counting down the days to see you again. You're perfect for me." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes and her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. The room around her blurred. It was as if everything was happening in slow motion. She dropped the phone onto the counter. Mark walked into the kitchen with a towel around his neck, drying his hair. When he saw Sarah standing there holding his phone, his face changed. For a second, he seemed surprised, but he quickly regained his cold expression. "What are you doing with my phone?" he asked, crossing his arms. Sarah looked at him, stunned. "Mark, who's Amanda? What is this? Are you having an affair?" He let out a dry laugh, showing no remorse. "I can't believe you went through my phone, Sarah. That's pathetic." "Pathetic? Pathetic is what you're doing to me," Sarah shouted, tears streaming down her face. "How could you? I'm your wife." Mark took a step forward and responded with a coldness that cut through Sarah like a blade. "You know what, Sarah? You let yourself go. Look at you. You're fat, sloppy. Do you really think I deserve to live like this? I deserve better." The words echoed like gunshots in her mind. "I deserve better." Sarah felt the ground collapse beneath her. The man who once vowed to love her now looked at her with disdain, as if she were a burden. She couldn't breathe. She tried to say something, but no words came out. "So that's it?" Sarah murmured, still in disbelief. Mark shrugged and without any consideration added, "I want a divorce. You should have seen this coming." He grabbed his phone from her hands, left the kitchen, and went to the bedroom. Minutes later, she heard the sound of zippers and firm footsteps as he packed a suitcase. Sarah sat there listening, unable to move. That same night, Mark left the house. He didn't even look back, as if their years of marriage meant nothing. When the door slammed, the silence in the house was deafening. Sarah sat on the kitchen floor, holding her face in her hands. She cried until she had no strength left. After Mark walked out the door, Sarah's life lost all meaning. The days blended into an endless cycle of emptiness and pain. She spent the first weeks on the living room couch, wearing the same clothes, staring at the floor, and questioning where she had gone wrong. The wedding photos were thrown into a box. Her wedding ring lay abandoned on the bathroom sink. The silence in the house, which once felt comforting, now screamed in her ears. The phone rang, but Sarah didn't answer. Concerned messages from friends were ignored. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't want to hear words like, "It'll be okay," or "You'll get through this." She thought, how can they understand? They don't know how much it hurts. Meals that were once prepared with such care had been replaced by bags of chips and pizza boxes. She ate not because she was hungry, but to try to fill the emptiness she felt inside. Each bite was accompanied by silent tears. At night, the food piled next to the couch was her only company. Sarah avoided mirrors. She didn't want to look at herself, didn't want to see the woman Mark had rejected reflected back at her. She remembered his words. "You've let yourself go, Sarah. I deserve better." They echoed in her mind constantly like a broken record. The world around her kept turning, but Sarah was no longer a part of it. The neighbors started to notice. Sarah, who used to greet everyone with a smile, now had her windows permanently shut. She didn't even come out to pick up the mail. At the bakery, her neighbor Carol whispered to someone, "Have you seen Sarah? She hasn't left her house in weeks." Poor thing. Ever since that divorce, she's really let herself go. The words made their way to Sarah one way or another. She knew everyone was talking, but she didn't have the strength to respond. She felt defeated, invisible, as though she no longer had any worth. Her friends who had initially tried to support her also began to drift away. They called, left messages, but without any response, they eventually gave up. Even Sarah's mom grew worried. "Honey, you need to pull yourself together. Come stay with me for a while, please." "I'm fine, Mom. I just need to rest." It was a lie. Sarah wasn't fine. She slept during the day and spent her nights awake, sitting on her bed, staring at her phone, and thinking about sending Mark a message. A part of her wanted to ask if he was happy now, if he missed her, if he regretted it. But she knew it wouldn't make a difference. One rainy night, Sarah finally broke down. Sitting on the bathroom floor, she looked at the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Her eyes were sunken, her face tired, her hair disheveled. She whispered to herself, "Who are you?" What happened to the Sarah who had dreams, who smiled at the world? She began to cry softly, then sob, until her tears turned into desperate wailing. She wanted to scream, but no one was there to hear her. For the first time, she thought about giving up. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I'm really worth nothing. Maybe you who are hearing this story know this feeling. That moment when everything seems lost, when the pain is so great you can't see a way out. But life has unexpected ways of waking us up. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the persistent sound of the doorbell. She dragged herself to the door, expecting it to be someone selling something or delivering a bill. But it wasn't. It was Carol, the neighbor who always had something to say. Carol looked at her, holding a bag of food, and said, "Sarah, sorry to show up like this, but you need to eat something decent and take a shower. You can't keep living like this." Sarah stood there not knowing what to say. The woman placed the bag in her hands and added, "You might think you're alone, but there are people who care about you. Don't forget that." Carol turned and left, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, holding that bag. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something different. Shame, perhaps, but also a small spark within her. She looked at the messy house, at the piled-up dishes, at the clothes scattered on the floor. Then she saw herself again in the hallway mirror. Sarah let out a long sigh and murmured, "I can't keep living like this." She didn't know how she was going to change, but in that moment, she decided she needed to get up. She needed to rediscover the Sarah who had been lost. Now tell me, what would you do in Sarah's place? Is it possible to bounce back after such humiliation? This powerful story can change your life and show you that you have the power to transform your own path. To receive more real and moving stories that will inspire and encourage you, subscribe to the channel. Only then will these stories reach you. What comes next will show you that life can still surprise you, and how. That morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the living room curtains, but Sarah didn't notice. The clock read nearly noon when she finally got up from the couch, where she had spent the entire night. As she dragged herself to the bathroom, the mirror always caught her attention. For weeks, Sarah avoided looking at it. She knew what she'd see again. But that day, something made her stop and face the reflection in a different way. She stood there in silence, observing the woman on the other side. Her hair was messy, her face swollen from nights of crying. The loose clothes did nothing to hide her weary appearance. It was as if time had erased who she used to be. "Who are you?" she whispered, touching her own face. Tears began to roll down. She remembered Mark's words. You've let yourself go, Sarah. I deserve better." Each syllable was a blow. For a few seconds, she felt that knot in her chest, that urge to give up. But from the depths of that sadness, something different arose. It was anger. Not anger at the world, but at herself. "I won't let him win. I won't live like this," Sarah whispered through her tears, her voice trembling. She looked at the mirror again, but this time with a different expression. It was no longer the resignation of someone defeated. It was the first spark of someone beginning to fight back. Sarah didn't know where to start, but she knew she had to do something, so she started small. That day, she opened all the windows in the house. Fresh air came in and light filled the rooms that had been dark for so long. She picked up the empty pizza boxes, the cups scattered around the living room, and for the first time in weeks, she washed the piled-up dishes. "One step at a time," she repeated to herself. Then she took a long shower, washed her hair, and put on clean clothes. It wasn't anything special, just jeans and a t-shirt, but it was enough to make her feel that something was changing. That night, instead of ordering food, Sarah opened the fridge and improvised a simple salad. As she ate, she thought, "I need to take care of myself. No one else will do it for me." The next day, Sarah gathered the courage to leave the house and take a walk around the neighborhood. She put on an old pair of sneakers, tied her hair back, and started walking, still slowly, but with determination. Each step felt like a challenge. As she walked through the streets, she noticed some neighbors looking at her, whispering. She knew what they were thinking. Look at Sarah trying to pick herself up after everything. But for the first time, it didn't matter. One day, as she passed the neighborhood gym, Sarah stopped in front of the door. Inside, she saw people running on treadmills, lifting weights and smiling between sets. She stood there frozen, with a knot in her stomach. "I don't belong here," she thought. Before she could leave, Mike, the same trainer she'd met weeks before, stepped out to get a coffee and saw her standing there. "Thinking about coming in?" he asked with a friendly smile. Sarah felt awkward. "I don't know. I'm not like them." Mike crossed his arms and said, "Nobody here is better than anyone else, Sarah. Everyone started somewhere. How about giving it a try?" With her heart racing, she walked in. Mike showed her around the machines, taught her a few simple moves, and created a basic workout plan for beginners. Sarah left that first day with sore muscles, but also a new feeling: determination. The gym routine wasn't easy. There were days she looked in the mirror and thought about quitting, but she forced herself to remember why she started. "I won't let him win." Another major change was her diet. Sarah left behind the bags of chips and pizzas that had been her companions on lonely nights. She searched online for simple recipes and started cooking her own meals. The first time she cooked a healthy dish, she took a picture and sent it to her mom. "You have no idea how happy this makes me, my daughter," her mom replied, emotional. Every small progress was a victory. The first pound lost, the first time she ran 5 minutes straight on the treadmill. She began noticing changes not just in her body but in her mind. Her confidence, which had seemed lost forever, started to return little by little. In the following weeks, Sarah built a routine. She woke up early, walked, went to the gym, and cooked her own meals. It wasn't easy. There were days when her body ached, when she wanted to give up, but then she remembered what she had told herself in the mirror: "I won't let him win." She started writing her goals in a notebook: lose weight, go back to school, rebuild her professional life. Every time she crossed off a goal, she felt like a piece of the old Sarah was coming back. "I'm still here," she told herself. One day as she passed by a clothing store, something caught her eye. It was a blue dress, similar to the one she had worn that night at dinner with friends when Mark humiliated her. Sarah stopped and stared at it. "Not yet, but soon," she whispered with a slight smile. She wasn't going to stop. Not anymore. Sarah still didn't know where all this would lead her. She only knew one thing: she was fighting. And if you've ever been through a moment like this, you know how hard the first step is, but it's the one that changes everything. So what happens when someone everyone thought was defeated decides to start over? Sarah was just getting started. As she rebuilt her physical health, Sarah realized she also needed to take care of her financial independence. She remembered how she had set her own dreams aside during her marriage. Now it was time to reclaim them. One night while browsing the internet, she came across an ad. Free course, how to start your own online business. It caught her attention. She clicked without a second thought. Sarah began attending online classes every night. Even though she didn't understand much at first, she wrote down everything she could. She listened to stories of people who had started from scratch and managed to transform their lives. This inspired her. If they could do it, why can't I? She would tell herself. She started studying digital marketing, sales, and financial planning. Each new piece of information seemed to open a door in her mind. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she had control over her life. Months passed, and the changes started becoming visible. Her walks turned into light jogs. The gym, which used to feel intimidating, became part of her routine. Sarah began losing weight, but more importantly, she was gaining a new version of herself. Slowly, friends who hadn't seen Sarah in months started noticing the difference. Carol, the neighbor who had brought her food that day, saw Sarah coming back from the gym and commented, "Sarah, look at you. You're glowing." Sarah smiled, took a deep breath, and replied, "I'm taking care of myself, Carol." Finally, Sarah's self-esteem began to grow again. She started dressing up, wearing clothes that highlighted her figure, and smiling more. Not for what others might think, but because she finally liked the woman she saw in the mirror. One day, while reviewing a business plan she was developing for her course, she paused, closed her eyes for a moment, and thought, if Mark saw me now, he wouldn't even recognize me. But at that moment, something became clear to her. Everything she was doing wasn't for him, it was for herself. And you? Have you realized how small steps can lead to big changes? Sarah started with just 10 minutes of walking and a free course. But what she was building now was something much greater. 2 years had passed since that morning when Sarah promised herself she wouldn't let Mark win. Now when she looked in the mirror, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. A strong, determined, and most importantly, happy woman. The 40 kilos that had been a symbol of pain and abandonment were now behind her. It wasn't just a physical transformation. Every gram lost was like shedding a layer of insecurity. Sarah no longer walked with her head down or avoided people's eyes. Now, when she walked through the streets of Austin, people noticed something different: confidence. The first to notice were her neighbors. Carol, the same neighbor who once appeared at her door with a bag of food, could hardly believe it when she saw Sarah leaving the house in a dress that accentuated her curves. "Sarah, oh my God, you look amazing. What did you do?" Sarah laughed and replied with a simplicity that hid all the effort of those 2 years. "I decided to take care of myself, Carol." But the surprise wasn't just among her neighbors. When Sarah started posting simple photos and videos on social media, sharing how small changes had transformed her life, something unexpected happened. Women began messaging her. "I saw myself in your story, Sarah. How did you do it? You inspired me to get out of bed today. Thank you." She couldn't believe the impact she was having. Suddenly, what had started as an attempt to save her own life became something much bigger. Remember the free course Sarah took on online business? That notebook full of notes became the starting point for something extraordinary. Sarah used her knowledge to create a business focused on women's well-being. At first, it was just a small online store with tips on healthy eating and simple workout programs for women who, like her, felt lost. "I know what it's like to not have the strength to start, but one small step can change everything," she said in her videos. Over time, Sarah realized her business was growing. More and more women were sharing their stories and becoming loyal clients. She created an online community, a safe space where women could support and motivate each other. The name of the startup? Rebirth, because that's exactly what she had done. The business exploded. Companies started reaching out for partnerships. Wellness magazines wanted interviews with the woman who turned pain into success. Sarah appeared on a local TV program where she shared her story and inspired thousands of viewers. Sitting in front of the host, she smiled and said, "I had to lose everything to find out who I really am. Today, I know my worth never depended on someone else." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Sarah, the CEO who inspired the world, that woman who, 2 years earlier, could barely get out of bed, was now sitting in meetings as the CEO of a million-dollar company. Rebirth began serving women around the world, offering programs for physical, mental, and financial transformation. One day at an international conference on women entrepreneurs, Sarah took the stage. Dressed in an elegant blue suit, she held the microphone and looked at the audience. 2 years ago, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I believed I had no value. Someone told me I wasn't enough. But today, I want each of you to know, what they say about you doesn't define who you are. The only opinion that matters is your own. The auditorium erupted in applause. Some women cried, others nodded, fully understanding what she meant. Sarah wasn't just a businesswoman. She had become a voice for thousands of people in need of hope. Sarah's success spread quickly. Pictures of her in magazines and videos of her speeches circulated all over the internet. It was inevitable. Mark saw them. One afternoon, Sarah's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, but answered. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Sarah? It's Mark." She was silent for a few seconds. "What do you want?" she replied firmly. Mark started talking about regret, about how he'd been an idiot, and ended with a request that, years earlier, would have completely shaken Sarah. "Don't you think we deserve a second chance?" Sarah took a deep breath, smiled slightly, and calmly replied, "No, Mark. You chose what you wanted back then, and today I choose myself." She hung up the phone and for the first time felt the weight of that relationship lift completely. And you? Have you thought about what happens when we decide to believe in ourselves? Sarah proved that it's possible to turn even the worst pain into something extraordinary. But the most beautiful part of her story is that she didn't do it to prove anything to anyone. She did it for herself. And now? How do you think Mark felt seeing the woman he once humiliated become so powerful? Because Sarah? Well, she was just getting started. It was a sunny afternoon in Austin, Texas, and the convention center was packed. Entrepreneurs, investors, and specialists gathered for a major business and innovation event. Sarah was among the most anticipated speakers. Dressed in an elegant black blazer and pants, with a confident posture and a serene smile, she walked through the main hall like a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. She was unrecognizable. As she passed groups of people, Sarah was greeted by other entrepreneurs, received compliments, and even requests for photos. She had become a role model. Everything felt natural to her now, but if someone had told her 2 years earlier she'd be here, she would never have believed it. "Sarah, your talk inspired so many of us. Thank you for being an example," said a young businesswoman holding her hands. "I'm glad I can help," Sarah replied with a sincere smile. The event continued, and after a guest speaker's presentation, Sarah went to the coffee table to grab some water. That's when something unexpected happened. While chatting with a colleague, she felt a gaze from across the room. Someone was staring at her intently. At first, she didn't pay attention, but the feeling persisted. When she turned her head, she saw him. Mark. He was standing there with a look of hesitation. It seemed like he was trying to determine if this confident, radiant woman was really his ex-wife. Sarah remained calm, but deep down she felt a small chill in her stomach. It wasn't fear. It wasn't nervousness. It was just the shock of seeing, after so long, the man who had once humiliated and abandoned her. Mark, with an almost incredulous expression, began to approach. He wore a worn-out suit and seemed older. He had lost the sparkle that once made him so self-assured. When he got close enough, he called out hesitantly, "Sarah? Is it you? I can't believe it." She looked at him for a moment, with a neutral expression, showing neither surprise nor discomfort. Mark continued, still trying to process what he was seeing. "My God, look at you. You've changed so much." Sarah took a deep breath and with a slight smile calmly replied, "Yes, Mark. I've changed." Mark seemed lost. His eyes scanned her face, her body, as if trying to reconcile the image of the Sarah he once knew with the powerful woman standing before him. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look amazing. What happened to you?" She looked him in the eyes and firmly replied, "I decided to choose myself." For a moment, Mark was speechless. He opened his mouth to say something, but seemed unable to find the right words. Sarah's presence, so secure and composed, left him unsettled. "Listen, Sarah, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. I was an idiot." She kept her light smile but didn't show any emotion. For her, this encounter wasn't about revenge. There was no anger or resentment left. She had already moved past it all. "Yes, you were, Mark, but honestly, it doesn't matter anymore." Mark ran his hand through his hair, clearly regretful and now insecure. He tried to continue. "Sarah, I wanted to apologize. If I had known that..." Sarah interrupted him politely but firmly. "If you knew what? That I would turn my life around? That I would build a much better life without you? Mark, what happened between us is in the past. I don't need your apologies. Today, the only person who defines me is myself." Mark froze. This was not the reaction he expected. Maybe he thought Sarah still harbored some resentment, or that deep down, she might feel something upon seeing him again. But what he saw was a woman who had moved on, who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I'm happy for you, really," he said almost awkwardly. Sarah simply nodded, grabbed her water bottle, and said calmly, "I hope you're doing well, Mark. Take care of yourself." She then walked away, head held high, with the same confidence that had brought her this far. Meanwhile, Mark remained frozen in place, watching her disappear into the crowd. He couldn't help but think, how did I let this woman slip away from my life? Have you ever noticed how life can surprise us? Sometimes what feels like the end is only the beginning of something much greater. Sarah ran into Mark again, but this time, he was the one left speechless. And the most beautiful part of this story is that, in the end, she didn't need to prove anything to him. She won for herself. And you? What would you do if you came face to face with someone who humiliated you in the past? Would you have the same strength as Sarah? Because sometimes the best response is simply to show who you've become. Time passed and Sarah's life was in a place she never imagined 2 years ago. Not only had she rebuilt her self-esteem and career, but she had also become an inspiration to thousands of women. But there was one thing Sarah still held deep in her heart: the fear of loving again. After what she went through with Mark, she believed love was no longer for her. She didn't want to risk being humiliated or hurt again. So she focused on her work. Renacer, her women's wellness company, was growing more and more. She traveled to events, gave talks to women around the world, and felt genuine happiness in helping others rebuild themselves. She was complete, or at least she thought she was, until she met Ethan. It all began during a conference in New York. Sarah was in the hotel lobby, organizing some notes for her upcoming presentation. The place was bustling with entrepreneurs and speakers. "Excuse me, but you dropped this," said a calm and friendly voice. Sarah looked up and saw a man holding one of the notebooks she had dropped without noticing. He had a kind smile and eyes that exuded calm. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but without the arrogance many carried. "Oh, thank you. I'm so distracted I didn't even notice," she replied, a bit embarrassed. He smiled again. "It happens to all of us. By the way, I'm Ethan. I think you're Sarah from Renacer, right?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Yes. How do you know?" "I attended your talk at the last event in Austin. Your story is inspiring." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She was used to professional compliments, but there was something different about how Ethan spoke. He didn't seem impressed just by her success, but by who she was as a person. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Good luck with your presentation today. I'll make sure to watch again." He said goodbye with a wave and went on his way, leaving Sarah standing there, half confused, half intrigued. During the event, Ethan really did watch her talk. Sarah noticed him in the audience, attentive to every word. After the presentation, he approached her. "You were incredible again. Can I buy you a coffee to celebrate?" Sarah hesitated. It was just coffee, but the fear was still there. However, there was something about Ethan that made her feel at ease. "Coffee doesn't hurt anyone," she replied with a shy smile. They sat in the hotel's cafe and began talking. Not about business or success, but about simple things. Favorite books, places to visit, childhood stories. Ethan wasn't just interested in the CEO of Renaissance. He wanted to know the real Sarah. By the end of the day, as they said goodbye, he said something that stayed with her. "You know, Sarah, you have an incredible way of turning pain into strength. Few people can do that." She thanked him and went to her room, but couldn't get Ethan out of her mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt butterflies in her stomach. In the months that followed, Ethan and Sarah continued to meet at events. He was a tech entrepreneur, running a startup that was also growing. They talked about their routines, struggles, and victories, and Sarah noticed something important. Ethan listened. He truly listened. There were no veiled criticisms or cruel jokes. He valued who she was and celebrated her achievements. One day during dinner, Ethan looked into her eyes and said, "Sarah, do you know how amazing you are? Not because of what you've built, but because of who you are." Those words touched her deeply. It was something she had never heard from Mark. Over time, Ethan became someone who stood by her in good and bad times. When Sarah faced challenges at work, he would say, "You're stronger than you think, and if you need me, I'm here." He didn't try to change who she was or diminish her. On the contrary, he supported her and helped her become even better. One morning, as they sipped coffee on the balcony of a house they rented during a trip to Colorado, Ethan turned to Sarah and asked, "Have you ever thought about loving again?" Sarah was silent for a moment. She looked at him and answered sincerely, "I thought love wasn't for me anymore. But you've shown me that true love starts with respect." Ethan smiled and held her hand. "I promise to always respect you, Sarah, because you deserve that and so much more." At that moment, Sarah understood. Love didn't have to be pain, humiliation, or effort to please someone. True love was light. It was partnership, respect, and support. She had finally found someone who saw her as she always deserved to be seen. Together, they continued to grow, building dreams and supporting each other every step of the way. Sarah no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, but now she knew that sharing her life with someone who respected her made everything more beautiful. And looking back, she smiled. Mark was just a chapter. Ethan was the future. Years later, by Ethan's side as her husband and life partner, Sarah reflected on everything she had accomplished. She still ran Renaissance, inspired women worldwide, and continued helping people believe in themselves. One morning while walking through the park, Ethan stopped and admired her. "Do you have any idea how many lives you've changed?" Sarah smiled, took a deep breath, and replied, "If I've managed to change one, it's been worth it." She knew her life hadn't been perfect, but everything she had been through made her the woman she was today. Strong, independent, and above all, happy. And Sarah's message for you is simple. No one has the right to define who you are or what you deserve. Your life is yours, and every day is a new chance to rise, to transform, to be reborn. And you, are you ready to take the first step? Because, as Sarah proved, change begins when you decide to believe in yourself. If you've made it this far, comment below, "I made it to the end." Share this and help spread this emotion to more people. Just click share and spread this incredible story.